So, you're the Emperor of Rome. You command the most powerful military in the world. What do you do with that power? If you're Elagabalus, you turn the imperial palace into a brothel. Marry a Vestal Virgin, which is illegal and considered sacrilege. Replace Rome's chief god with a giant black rock from Syria and reportedly work as a prostitute in your own palace, complete with a specially decorated room where you solicit customers. Elagabalus ruled Rome for less than 4 years, from 218 to 222 CE, and in that time, he became one of the most controversial, scandalous, and bizarre figures in Roman history. Ancient sources describe him as depraved, insane, and blasphemous. Modern historians debate whether those accounts were exaggerated, propaganda, or genuine records of an emperor who defied every social norm Rome held sacred. Either way, his reign was a spectacular disaster, and it ended exactly how you'd expect, with assassination, mutilation, and his body thrown into the Tiber River. Welcome to the strange, scandalous, and wildly inappropriate rule of Elagabalus. Let's begin. Elagabalus wasn't supposed to be emperor. He was born around 204 CE in Syria, in the city of Emesa, and his birth name was Varius Avitus Bassianus. His family was powerful but provincial. His mother, Julia Soaemias, was part of the Severan dynasty, connected to the previous emperor Caracalla. But Elagabalus himself was raised not as a politician or soldier, but as a priest, specifically a priest of the sun god Elagabal, a local Syrian deity whose worship centered around a massive black meteorite believed to be sacred. From childhood, Elagabalus served this god, performing elaborate rituals, dressing in ornate priestly robes, and dancing in religious ceremonies. This wasn't Roman, this wasn't traditional, and it would become a problem. In 217 CE, the emperor Caracalla was assassinated, and a man named Macrinus seized the throne. But Macrinus was unpopular, especially with the military. Enter Julia Misa, Elagabalus's grandmother, a shrewd, ambitious woman who saw an opportunity. She spread a rumor that Elagabalus was actually the illegitimate son of Caracalla, making him the rightful heir to the throne. It was almost certainly a lie, but the Syrian legions believed it, or at least they pretended to. In 218 CE, when Elagabalus was just 14 years old, the legions declared him emperor. Macrinus tried to resist, but his forces were defeated and he was executed. Elagabalus, a teenage Syrian priest with no military or political experience, was now the ruler of Rome. This should have been a disaster from the start, and it was. Elagabalus arrived in Rome in 219 CE, and immediately the Senate and the people were horrified. He didn't dress like a Roman emperor. He wore the elaborate, colorful priestly robes of his Syrian god, silk, gold, jewels, makeup. He didn't act like a Roman emperor either. He refused to participate in traditional Roman religious ceremonies, dismissing them as inferior. Instead, he brought his black stone god to Rome and installed it in a new temple on the Palatine Hill, right next to the most sacred Roman temples. He declared that Elagabal was now the supreme god of Rome, above Jupiter, above Mars, above all the traditional deities. The Senate was furious. The people were confused, and Elagabalus didn't care. But the religious controversy was just the beginning. What really shocked Rome, what made Elagabalus infamous, was his personal behavior. Ancient historians like Cassius Dio and the author of the Historia Augusta, a collection of imperial biographies, though notoriously unreliable, describe Elagabalus as sexually deviant, cross-dressing, and engaging in behavior that violated every Roman standard of decency. According to these sources, he wore women's clothing, makeup, and wigs. He called himself the wife of his male lovers. He allegedly asked doctors if they could surgically alter his body to give him female anatomy. And most infamously, he supposedly set up a brothel inside the imperial palace and worked as a prostitute, standing in a doorway and soliciting clients like a common sex worker. Now, here's the question. How much of this is true? Ancient Roman historians hated Elagabalus. He was foreign, young, weird, and he defied Roman norms. After his death, his enemies controlled the historical narrative, and they had every reason to exaggerate or fabricate stories to make him look monstrous. Some modern historians believe Elagabalus may have been transgender or gender nonconforming, and that the ancient sources were portraying his identity through a lens of disgust and misunderstanding. Others think he was simply a rebellious, sexually adventurous teenager with no understanding of political consequences. And some believe the stories are largely true, that Elagabalus genuinely did engage in public sex work as a form of performance, provocation, or personal gratification. We'll never know for certain, but what we do know is that Rome was scandalized, and the scandal was just getting started. Let's talk about the brothel. According to Cassius Dio, a Roman senator and historian who lived during Elagabalus's reign, the emperor set aside a room in the imperial palace and turned it into a personal brothel. Not for entertaining guests, not for hosting orgies, but for working as a prostitute himself. He allegedly stood in the doorway, naked or nearly naked, wearing a blonde wig and makeup, and solicited customers. He would beckon to passers-by, quote, prices, and engage in sexual acts for money. Money he didn't need, since he was the richest man in the empire. The Historia Augusta adds even more lurid details. It claims Elagabus had the room decorated to look like a common street-side brothel, complete with curtains and suggestive decorations. It says he preferred to play the passive role in sexual encounters. Language the Romans used with contempt, as being sexually receptive, was considered degrading for a man, especially for an emperor. It also claims he sought out men with large genitals and rewarded them with government positions, making sexual prowess a qualification for political office. Now, again, how much of this is real? Roman historians loved to destroy the reputations of emperors they hated, and sexual scandal was the easiest weapon. Accusing a man of being sexually passive, of cross-dressing, of prostitution, these were the ultimate insults in Roman culture. So it's entirely possible these stories were exaggerated or invented to delegitimize But even if the details are embellished, the core accusation that Elagabalus publicly defied Roman sexual norms seems to have been based on something real. Multiple sources mention it. The Senate was appalled by his behavior, and even his own family eventually turned against him. What's particularly shocking is that Elagabalus didn't hide this behavior. He reportedly flaunted it. He held banquets where he appeared in women's clothing. He appointed his male lovers to high-ranking government positions, openly referring to them as his husbands. One of these lovers, a former slave and chariot driver named Hierocles, was allegedly given a position of power equivalent to a Caesar. Ancient sources claim Elagabalus called Hierocles' husband and himself Hierocles' wife at public events. He would reportedly greet Hierocles with kisses and affection, behavior that scandalized Roman society. The Romans weren't prudes. They had bathhouses, brothels, sexual art everywhere. But there were rules. Sex was fine, as long as you maintained your dignitas, your social standing. As long as you played the dominant role, if you were a man. As long as you didn't humiliate yourself publicly. Elagabalus broke every rule. He didn't just engage in unconventional sexual behavior privately, he made it public. He made it political. And for Rome, that was unforgivable. There's also the question of whether this was genuine self-expression or deliberate provocation. Some historians argue that Elagabalus was intentionally shocking Rome, using his body and behavior as a way to assert power, to show that he could do whatever he wanted and no one could stop him. Others suggest he was simply acting out, a teenager with unlimited power and no one to tell him no. And still others believe he was genuinely exploring his gender and sexuality in a society that had no framework for understanding it. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Rome was horrified. The Senate despised him, the people mocked him, and his own family. His grandmother, Julia Misa, who had orchestrated his rise to power, began to realize they'd made a terrible mistake. Elagabalus didn't just break sexual norms, he broke religious ones too. And nowhere was this more scandalous than in his marriages. In his 4-year reign, Elagabalus married at least 5 times. This alone was unusual for a Roman emperor, but what made it truly shocking was who he married and how he treated marriage itself. His first wife was Julia Paula, a Roman noblewoman. That marriage was annulled after less than a year. Then he married Aquila Severa, a Vestal Virgin. This was a bombshell. Vestal Virgins were priestesses of the goddess Vesta, sworn to 30 years of chastity. They were considered sacred. Their virginity was tied to the security of Rome itself. If a Vestal Virgin broke her vow, she would be buried alive. And if anyone seduced or raped a Vestal, they would be executed. So for the emperor to marry one, that was sacrilege. It violated centuries of religious law. Elagabalus defended the marriage by claiming that the union of a high priest himself and a high priestess Aquilia Severa would produce godlike children. The Senate was not convinced. The public was outraged. Even some of Elagabalus's supporters thought he'd gone too far. But he didn't care. He kept Aquilia as his wife, at least for a while. Then he divorced her and married a third woman, Aeneia Faustina, a descendant of Marcus Aurelius. Then he divorced her and remarried Aquilia Severa. Then he may have married yet another woman. The sources disagree on the exact timeline, but the point is clear. Elagabalus treated marriage as disposable, a political tool or personal whim rather than a sacred institution. And all of this was happening while he was publicly referring to his male lovers as his husbands. Roman sources describe Elagabalus holding a mock marriage ceremony with Hierocles, the chariot driver, in which Elagabalus played the bride. He allegedly wore a veil, acted submissive, and referred to himself as Lady and Empress. Whether this was a genuine attempt to live as a woman, a satirical performance, or simply a way to provoke Roman society, we don't know, but the effect was the same. It enraged the traditionalists and made Elagabalus look increasingly unfit to rule. Marriage in Rome wasn't just personal, it was political. Emperors married to secure alliances, produce heirs, and maintain the dignity of the imperial office. Elagabalus did none of that. He married for lust, for novelty, for blasphemy, and in doing so, he undermined his own authority. Because if the emperor didn't respect Roman traditions, why should anyone else? Let's talk about the god Elagabalus. Wasn't just a scandal because of his sexual behavior or his marriages. He was a scandal because he tried to fundamentally change Roman religion. When he arrived in Rome, he brought with him the black stone of Elagabal, the meteorite that was worshipped in his hometown of Emissa. This wasn't a statue, it wasn't a traditional idol. It was a massive, irregularly shaped black rock, believed to have fallen from the sky and therefore to contain divine power. Elagabalus built a new temple for the stone on the Palatine Hill, one of the most important religious sites in Rome. He called it the Elagabalium, and then he declared that Elagabal, this foreign Syrian god represented by a rock, was now the supreme deity of Rome, not equal to Jupiter, not alongside Jupiter, above Jupiter. He ordered that sacred Roman relics, including the fire of Vesta and the Palladium, a statue of Athena said to protect Rome, be moved to his temple. He held massive public ceremonies where he danced around the stone in his priestly robes, performing Syrian rituals that the Romans found bizarre and offensive. This was religious revolution. Rome was a polytheistic society, but it had a hierarchy of gods. Jupiter was king, Mars was the protector, Vesta was the guardian of the hearth. These gods had been worshipped for centuries, and their rituals were deeply tied to Roman identity. Elagabalus was trying to replace all of that with a foreign god that most Romans had never heard of. He wasn't adding to the pantheon, he was trying to reshape it entirely. The Senate was appalled, the priests were outraged, the people were confused. Some sources claim Elagabalus tried to marry his god to other Roman deities, arranging a symbolic marriage between Elagabal and the goddess Minerva, or the Carthaginian goddess Tenet. Whether this was genuine religious syncretism or just more provocation is unclear, but the result was chaos. Rome's religious establishment turned against him. And here's the thing. Religion in Rome wasn't just about belief, it was about practice. It was about maintaining the Pax Diorum, the peace of the gods. If the gods were angry, bad things happened. Plagues, famines, military defeats. So when Elagabalus disrespected the traditional gods, people genuinely feared divine punishment. They believed he was endangering Rome itself. By 222 CE, Elagabalus had been emperor for less than 4 years, and Rome had had enough. His grandmother, Julia Missa, the woman who had put him on the throne, realized he was a disaster. The Senate wanted him gone. The Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers who protected the emperor, were turning against him. Even his own mother, Julia Soaemius, couldn't protect him anymore. Julia Missa had a backup plan, Elagabalus's cousin, Alexander Severus, a more traditional, stable boy who could be molded into a proper emperor. She began grooming Alexander to replace Elagabalus. At first, Elagabalus didn't see the threat. He even adopted Alexander as his heir. But as Alexander gained popularity, Elagabalus grew paranoid. He allegedly tried to have Alexander killed multiple times, but Julia Misa and the Praetorian Guard protected him. In March 222 CE, tensions reached a breaking point. Elagabalus and his mother went to the Praetorian camp to assert his authority. But the guards had already made their choice. They turned on him. Elagabalus tried to flee. He reportedly hid in a latrine, then in a large chest. But he was found. The Praetorian guards killed him, along with his mother. He was 18 years old, but the violence didn't end there. The guards mutilated his body. They dragged it through the streets of Rome. They threw it into the Tiber River, the same river where executed criminals were disposed of. The message was clear. Elagabalus wasn't just a bad emperor, he was a disgrace. His body was treated like garbage. The Senate immediately declared damnatio memoria, the erasure of his memory. His name was chiseled off monuments. His statues were destroyed. His laws were annulled. Rome wanted to forget he ever existed. So who was Elagabalus? A depraved tyrant, a mentally ill teenager, a misunderstood individual exploring gender and sexuality in a hostile society. The truth is, we'll never know for certain. The ancient sources that describe him, Cassius Dio, Herodian, the Historia Augusta, were written by his enemies or by people who relied on hostile accounts. They had every reason to exaggerate, to scandalize, to demonize. Modern historians have tried to reassess his reign. Some argue that Elagabalus may have been one of history's first documented transgender individuals, using the language and tools available in Roman society to express a female identity. Others see him as a sexual libertine, pushing boundaries because he could. Still, others think he was simply a foolish, immature ruler who had no idea how to wield power responsibly. What we do know is this: Elagabalus defied Roman norms in almost every way possible. He rejected traditional religion, traditional gender roles, traditional sexual behavior, and traditional imperial dignity. And Rome destroyed him for it. Whether that makes him a monster or a martyr depends on your perspective. But either way, his story is a reminder that power without understanding, especially in a society that demands conformity, is a very dangerous thing.